Hi, my name is Kathleen Lugrich, and I'm the Manager of Programs and Ticketing for the Army Historical Foundation and your host for Army Artifacts, a new program for Army Historical Foundation members that demonstrates that Army history can be found everywhere. Today, my guest is Benjamin Clark, curator for the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Research Center in Santa Rosa, California. And today he will be sharing the Army story of Charles M. Schulz and some of the Army-related artifacts in the museum's collection.
Thank you. Good to be here. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Benjamin Clark, curator of the Charles Schulz Museum, and this is the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Research Center in beautiful Santa Rosa, California, or at least our front entrance. And Santa Rosa, for those who are unfamiliar, we're about an hour north of San Francisco. So if you are making a trip out to San Francisco, it's a great little detour to come up north and get out of the city and see the vineyards of wine country and come see the art of Charles Schulz. And today I'll be sharing some of the original strips like this, and some where we don't have the original art. So you'll probably be able to catch the distinction. These are quite a bit larger and they're done in ink, and you can see just a lot more detail in these everyday strips. So this is Charles Schulz. When he was a teenager with his parents, Carl and Dina, Schulz was born in 1922 in Minneapolis and was raised mostly in St. Paul. And that is his dog, Spike. And Spike was, a really important part of the family and a pretty unique dog, and by all accounts. He just by observation, of the day-to-day routine of the family, he, figured out how to, ring the doorbell of the house, and how to, he knew what time it was. It was time to go get the newspaper in the evening and things like that. And he was just a pretty remarkable dog by everyone's memories. And he was also the subject of Schulz's very first published drawing. Here at the very bottom, you can see Spike drawn by Sparky, as it's captioned in Ripley's Believe It or Not. Schulz drew this and this was published when he was about 14. From a very early age, he had a remarkable talent for drawing, and that was recognized by everyone. He was a bright kid. They had moved away briefly to Needles, California, which would of course play a part in Peanuts later on. While he was there, he was skipped ahead a couple of grades. And when he came back to the Twin Cities, he was just kind of always the smallest kid. And so it kind of, he was already a reserved person. So it kind of made him even more reserved and shy. But he had this talent for drawing. Everyone recognized. So other kids would always ask him to draw in their notebooks, and can you draw me Popeye? Can you draw Mickey Mouse? Can you draw Donald Duck? And which he would do. And so he just kind of had this talent for it. And of course, Spike later inspires another really crazy dog with some unique talents that we all come to know and love. When he was in high school, they asked him to draw for the yearbook, to do some cartoon illustrations and things. And for some reason, he said he never found out why, the drawings were never included. And he always took this as kind of a slight almost. It was kind of a hard memory for him that he was just like, man, my drawings, he felt rejected unnecessarily when he had been invited to contribute. And so ever thereafter, Schulz would always give permission to people to use Peanuts art in their yearbooks. And he'd just always say, hey, be sure to send me a copy though. And so eventually, his biographer mentions seeing in his studio a stack of yearbooks that went from the floor and touched the ceiling. So here's Sparky. He was nicknamed Sparky after the comic strip character Sparkplug, shortly after he was born. So everyone who knew him called him Sparky, and I'll probably refer to him as Sparky quite a bit throughout this presentation. He said he had no memory of his parents even ever calling him Charles ever in his life. this is one of their last photographs taken with all three of them. Schulz was an only child, and his parents were very loving and supportive. But his mother became very ill with cancer in his teens, and she eventually passed away. During his senior year of high school, which was in 1940, he was given an art assignment. He was given this 11 by 17 sheet of paper and was told, just fill it with whatever comes to mind. Fill it in with little drawings in threes. That was his only instruction. And his art teacher said he couldn't get it down fast enough. He just flew through the assignment, completely filled the paper. And she said his mind was just so full of all these observations and little things. And this is actually our just about our oldest piece of art from him. Is this assignment, because the teacher kept it and used it for many, many years thereafter at Central High School there in St. Paul as an example of a good execution of that assignment. But it's interesting also to see what a senior in high school who in 1940 might be thinking about. Here we see American flags, parachutes, and Hitler and swastikas. So of course it's on his mind, like it probably was for a lot of young men. There's a great comic from 1954. Shermie, one of the earliest characters in Peanuts, who kind of fades away in later years, tells Charlie Brown, "You have a terrific comic book collection, Charlie Brown. Revolutionary War comics, War of 1812 comics, Civil War comics, World War I comics, World War II comics, Korean War comics." And Charlie Brown says, "The next issue has really got me worried." It was on his mind, and how could it not be? Schulz is drafted in 1943 after he turns 20, and he's going through his induction at Fort Snelling, and he's about to ship out to Fort Campbell, and he's still able to come home on the weekends, I guess. And he goes in to say goodbye to his mother, who had been bedridden at that point for quite a while. And she says, "Well, Sparky, we should probably say goodbye. It's probably the last time I'll see you." And she was right. By the time he got back to Fort Snelling, she had passed away. And so he was given bereavement leave to bury his mother and then turn around and go to Fort Campbell. And the man who sat next to him on the train from Fort Snelling down to Fort Campbell for 3 days was interviewed later in life. And he said, yeah, he never said a word that whole time, just looked out the window. And said, I found out later his mom had just died. So that was what had happened. So Schulz had never really been away from home. He had never been away from his parents. And here his mother had just died and he's off to war. So he gets to Fort Campbell and just, it's really hard, of course. And another man kind of sees him, and a man by the name of Elmer Hagemeyer, middle name is Roy, so that's the E.R. Hagemeyer on these envelopes. And Elmer Hagemeyer, he's about 10 years older, and he had been a cop in St. Louis, and came from a family of police officers. And so he sees this young man who's obviously really having a hard time in those first days, and he kind of just takes him under his wing, and Schulz would later say he kind of big brothered me. And he kind of found out what was going on and just kind of looked after him. And they just became very, very close friends. Whenever they'd get a furlough, Elmer would take him home to St. Louis. And, so Schulz met his wife and his whole extended family, and they just kind of adopted him. And so he would always stay with them. So on dozens of letters home, Elmer's letters home to his wife, Margaret, Schulz would illustrate them. So there's these great little cartoons by Charles Schulz on these wartime envelopes. He would also write letters himself to Margaret occasionally and illustrate those as well with little cartoons. Here's Schulz a little later with his father on a leave. I think this is back at St. Paul, although we're not 100% sure. But there's his dad, Carl. And as I said, he would he would write regularly. His father actually met another woman in the neighborhood, and her name was Annabelle. And Annabelle took up writing to Sparky as well. So he would write to her, and we have some wonderful letters between them as well that really help us understand his experience there at Fort Campbell during the time he was there. He was there for about 18 months, for quite a while. And in that time, he had taken a sketchbook with him. And this is the cover of it, As We Were by Sparky. These wonderful figures on the front, these adults, which we're not quite as used to seeing from the hand of Charles Schulz. But looking at it, if I say, well, that's Charles Schulz, you kind of go, oh yeah, it does look like him. But Schulz, he had taken a correspondence course in art in those years towards the end of high school and then after. And so he had some training in sketching and draftsmanship. And so in it, we see some, realistic sketches and also some more cartoons, because Schulz, from the time he was a child, just loved cartoons. Comic strips were, it's really hard to overstate, how important they were to the entertainment landscape of the Great Depression, and especially for the children who grew up in it. And so it was what he always wanted to do. From the time he was 6 years old, he said, I want to be a cartoonist. And that was his only ambition ever. And so we see lots of these great little cartoons as well, illustrating Army life, and some of these realistic sketches. Schulz served in the 20th Infantry Division as armored infantry. He ends up rising through the ranks and becoming a squad leader for a light machine gun squad in command of a half-track, which illustrated here, probably on maneuvers. Check the date. Yeah, that's right. So it's probably in the wilderness of Kentucky or Tennessee there. And it was in that time that Schulz was, for a kid who bought, 4 newspapers in the Twin Cities, 2 from St. Paul and 2 from Minneapolis. So he could read 4 giant comic strip sections every week. The Army newspapers didn't have a lot of comics in them. They had some, but not quite what he was up to. But he found the work of Bill Malden in that time, reading Stars and Stripes. And like most GIs, just fell in love with Willie and Joe and their realistic portrayal through cartoon medium. And he was so impressed by that. And it ever after, I think, influenced his work. And of course, he would often have Snoopy on Veterans Day head over to Bill Malden's house to quaff a few root beers. He and Malden end up becoming good friends. It was largely a telephone relationship. They would call each other pretty regularly and talk. They would eventually meet up a couple of different times. But they got to know each other pretty well. And I think Malden's work really influenced Peanuts, because his work was really, it was still funny, but it had a realism. There were, it wasn't slapstick. There were dark shadows, in it. And Peanuts has that as well. There's an emotional realism that comes in that Schulz's earliest work really doesn't have. It's more silly and funny and reflective, but maybe not quite asking things like, does life have a meaning? I feel depressed. It doesn't do that. But it does after he sees a lot of the work of Bill Malden. So with the 20th Armored Division, they go over in February, I think it was in February of 45, and land at Le Havre and stay at Rouen for a while, waiting for all their equipment to catch up, and then start the sprint across France and Germany. They were there to help liberate Dachau and pass through Germany, and eventually landing at Salzburg, Austria in time for VE Day. So Schulz was really only in Europe for just the final weeks of the war. He talks a lot about how they were largely dealing with surrendering German soldiers and things like that. At Dachau, his experience was he did see survivors. There was the Germans had blown up some bridges and they were kind of trying to figure out how to get across the rivers and keep going. And his particular group was told just keep going. And so he never entered the camp, but he had been there for a day or two and did see survivors. As I said, Schulz rose up through the ranks, eventually making staff sergeant, which he illustrates here in a letter to Margaret Hagemeyer. And again, another, this one's an original. You can see it's dedicated across the top there, for Bill with friendship, Charles Schulz. And Schulz would send originals to people occasionally. And so some of them have these kinds of dedications and inscriptions we'll find. This is pretty great. So as the war winds down, Schulz heads home, and he's as determined as ever, maybe even with renewed determination, to become a cartoonist. Like I said, it was really the only thing he ever wanted to do. And so he, the St. Paul Pioneer Press, his local newspaper, ran, a couple of nice articles on him coming home. And I mean, here's a guy, he's got, he still only has just that one publication from when he was 14, and but he's obviously got a lot of talent. And that correspondence course happened to be run by a company out of Minneapolis, and he applied there to be an instructor, and so they hired him on. So he actually joined the staff with several of his former instructors to teach art correspondence courses. And then finally, 1948, Sparky's Little Folks appears in the St. Paul Pioneer Press again. Up in the upper left, you can see his panel cartoon, which would be a collection of unrelated kind of panels. Little Folks did not have any recurring characters, but it was children who are, kind of have big worries and some big vocabularies too sometimes. So it's definitely where Peanuts is starting to form and take root. So we love seeing these old Little Folks cartoons. Here it is blown up a little better so you can read it. The style of the art is still a little more realistic. The children are still fairly proportional, but the humor is definitely there. There's also some little dogs that just kind of keep appearing in these strips as well. No cats, just dogs. Including and some Peanuts tropes do show up, including the sports-loving grandmother, like in the bottom right. Mom says you can come in if you'll promise not to wrestle anymore with Grandma. Schulz's own grandmother, his mother's mother, had been a widow for quite a while, and she had a lot of adult children, and she would just kind of spend 6 months or so with each of them, just kind of cycling through, and she would stay often with Carl and Dina and Sparky. And so she, when she was around, she was a good sport and would sometimes even play attend goal for him to shoot tennis balls in the basement, practicing his hockey, which he loved. And Schulz was also starting to sell these little kid cartoons to the Saturday Evening Post. So he's starting to break into a really big market, starting to see just that little bit of success and encouragement, and build that portfolio to pitch ideas to the big syndicates to run a comic strip. He would love to nationally someday. I love this cartoon particularly. We've got this crew of kids in a wagon and this little white dog with a black spot on his back and black ears, and everybody hang on real tight in case he starts with a sudden jerk. It's that wonderful humor coming through. And then finally, on October 2nd, 1950, in 7 newspapers, Peanuts appears. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner there, that's it in the Chicago Tribune. It was only 7 papers, but some of those papers were big papers. And here it is, a little bigger. Of course, I would love to show you the original of this, but it is probably long gone. But here it is, that famous punchline. So, well, here comes good old Charlie Brown, and there's Shermie and Patty sitting on the curb. Charlie Brown's approaching. He doesn't even have his zigzag shirt yet, which he'll get within the year. But good old Charlie Brown, yes sir, good old Charlie Brown. How I hate him. Peanuts revolutionized comics, not only in its style of art, but also in its humor. It's really remarkable how reading comics through the 20s, 30s, 40s, just how, if you really kind of immerse yourself in that and then come back to Peanuts, just how different it looks. Today, this looks very normal to us, but that's because it just changed absolutely everything in comics thereafter, and a lot of entertainment and everything else. In 1955, Charles Schulz is appearing in 100 newspapers. His syndicate, United Feature Syndicate, signs him to an extension of his contract, and he wins the Reuben Award, which he has here, for the top cartoonist of the year. This award is named after Rube Goldberg, who is the man presenting him his award. Schulz is he's achieved every dream by 1955, and he's only just begun. Schulz would appear, Peanuts would appear in over 2,000 newspapers at the end of his life, and of course millions of readers around the world, dozens of languages. Just really became a very, its own phenomenon. But Schulz's time in the Army really, it really comes through all of it. If we look closely, which I've done kind of recently, within the last couple of years, I realized that all of the summer camp sequences really are very affected by his time in the Army. This sequence here specifically, there's this boy on the left there with Charlie Brown who's called Roy. And if we remember back, Roy was Elmer Hagemeyer, his best friend in the Army. Roy was his middle name. And so this boy, Roy, actually appears in several different years in the summertime when the Peanuts gang packs off to summer camp. And this sequence here probably is very autobiographical. Well, so long, Charlie Brown. It's been nice knowing you. It's been nice knowing you too, Roy. Have a good trip home. For this first time in my life, I feel I really helped someone. He was lonesome and I became his friend. What an accomplishment. We love seeing Charlie Brown happy because it doesn't happen all that often in the strip. Here's Roy again. Roy is actually the one to introduce Peppermint Patty into the strip. And this one's pretty funny because Peppermint Patty is very opposite of Charlie Brown. She's very confident, and she also loves camp. And here she is. Well, so long, Roy. I'm off to camp this year. I'm in charge of a tent. It's almost like a counselor. Isn't that great? I love going to camp. For a girl like me, it's the next best thing to being drafted in the infantry, which of course Schulz dreaded. And did experience, so it's pretty, but it says a lot about Peppermint Patty. Sally also has a interesting point of view on camp. She tries to get out of going all the time, especially through the 70s and 80s. She says, where are we? This is a survival camp. Oh, what? I think they're going to teach us how to survive. Well, that's easy. Don't get off the bus. Sally is very pragmatic often, and maybe not always book smart, but she's got a lot of instinct, I think, for things. And of course, Schulz very famously in the 90s, he reconnects back with some of his old, veteran buddies. He attends some of the veteran reunion events. He gets involved with the National D-Day Memorial Project, and actually becomes the chair of their fundraising group. And he also begins to do things like this in the strip, where he's paying more direct tribute to World War II veterans in different ways. Jean Schulz, his widow, shared a story with me that she said, one day it occurred to me, she was talking with him about, that period of time when his mother had died, and his induction process and all of that. And she says, Sparky, has it ever occurred to you, because he had that bereavement leave, it put him in a different group, and the men that he had gone through induction with actually were many of the men who were there at D-Day. And she said, did it ever occur to you that your mother's death may have saved your life? And he said, I think about it every day. And so that's why, although Schulz himself was not a participant on D-Day, he did have a strong emotional tie to the men who were there and to that experience, and was ever so grateful for it. He did go to the beaches of Normandy. He had been there and visited those sites. Here's Sparky in the 90s trying on his Ike jacket. Still fits pretty good. The National D-Day Memorial presented him with a maquette of one of their statues. Schulz had, like I had said, he had chaired their fundraising group, and actually had given a gift of $1 million towards that project, which here's the statue. The actual statue is there today. We can see it. Schulz never got to see it, though. He died in February of 2000. And his grave marker is this photograph. People add Peanuts things, of course, all the time to it, but the marker itself it just reads simply Charles M. Schulz, Sergeant, U.S. Army, World War II, and the dates of his life. So, and of course that final strip, which ran the day after he died, and literally this was on printing presses as he died, and which is pretty remarkable, because he, like I said, all he ever wanted to be was a cartoonist, and was able to achieve that ambition in his lifetime and see it go to heights he never could have even imagined. So pretty remarkable stuff, and all of that, he would give his experience in the Army a lot of credit to making him into who he was, a kid who had been so reserved and shy, into someone who could take a stand and be more assertive when he needed to be, and to be a leader, because it takes a lot of leadership to accomplish the things he did as well. So it's pretty amazing stuff. And thank you so much for your time. I've loved being able to share the story of Charles Schulz with you. Of course, you can stay connected with us here at the Charles Schulz Museum in Santa Rosa, California, by visiting our website and finding us on your favorite social media platforms. So I'm Benjamin Clark, curator here at the Schulz Museum. Thank you very much.
That was great. I loved all that. Thank you so much. Why are these artifacts and the story of Charles Schulz important to Army and U.S. history?
Well, the impact of Peanuts is global. I mean, it's really one of the, a cultural ambassador for American culture around the world, deliberate or not. And, so Schulz's impact is enormous. And so to have a man of his background, but of his character, I think is really important. And his Army experience, was a huge contributor to that.
Why do you think people should learn about his being in the Army?
Well, formed who he was, you know, every bit as much as being, you know, raised in St. Paul, and, you know, his family background. It's as important as that, you know. It influenced him in the way that, you know, how he was formed, you know, how he developed as a child. You know, this really, you know, he never went to college. You know, he went straight from high school into the workplace, and so this gave him that maturity that he really lacked, and it really helped him a lot. So it's, you know, I think he's an important person in American history, and that experience is important to who he was.
You showed a lot of some of the sketchbooks and envelopes that he decorated or sketched in. Are those items available to see at the museum?
They are. We have a dedicated gallery. We call it our biographical gallery, that talks about his life and development and all that specifically. And of course, there's a case dedicated just to his Army experience. So you will see maybe not those exact artifacts every time you would come, but you will see something dedicated to that at any time.
Now, I know this is a big year for you. It's the 100th anniversary of his birthday, and it's also your 20th anniversary. Do you have any special things that are going on during this year?
Tons.
Check the website, right?
Check the website. Although one of the things I'm most excited about is we do have a book that'll be coming out featuring a lot of those artifacts pertaining to his life. So be on the lookout for that when it launches, and yeah, find us online. There's a lot going on.
Well, I want to thank Benjamin for being my guest today, especially since the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Research Center will be installing their own unit tribute at their site, which will be a duplicate of the one here in Virginia for the 20th Armored Division. So our sites will be joined across the country by this one Army story. If you'd like to learn more about the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Research Center, please visit their website at schultzmuseum.org. And if you'd like to learn more about honoring fellow soldiers and loved ones through the purchase of your own unit tribute or brick, you can visit the Foundation's website at www.armyhistory.org. Thank you for joining me once again for Army Artifacts.